When we look at history, a chilling truth emerges. In times of turmoil and uncertainty, people instinctively look for a villain to blame. A tyrant, a corrupt party, a foreign ideology, someone or something they can brand as the ultimate evil. But there is an even more dangerous force lurking in the shadows. It doesn't operate through guns or propaganda alone. It lives quietly inside everyday minds. The German theologian and resistance fighter Dietrich Bonhoeffer had a name for it: stupidity. This isn't about lacking intelligence or being foolish in a trivial sense. Bonhoeffer saw stupidity as a psychological and social condition that arises when a person abandons their critical independence and mindlessly follows the crowd. It's a sort of voluntary blindness that transforms someone into a puppet, utterly convinced they are right, all while spreading harm. That's why stupidity is far more terrifying than pure evil. The malicious person knows they are causing harm. The stupid person believes they are on a righteous mission, acting with fervor and moral certainty. And that is exactly why they are so difficult to confront. You cannot reach them through reason, logical debate, or evidence. As Bonhoeffer wrote in his prison letters, "Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Neither protests nor force can touch it. Arguments fall on deaf ears." Here, stupidity isn't a question of IQ. It's about a surrendered conscience, a deep moral failure. In moments of crisis, stupidity spreads like a wildfire. Even highly educated, seemingly decent individuals are swept away. People who would otherwise reject extremist ideas suddenly champion them passionately. Why? Because they stop thinking as individuals and become mere extensions of collective hysteria. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung offered a profound and equally unsettling insight. In his book, The Undiscovered Self, Jung argues that when an individual dissolves into the mass, it marks the true collapse of civilization. Scientific progress, technological advances, and rigid bureaucracies create humans who are efficient on the outside but hollow inside. They don't think. They repeat. They don't feel. They react as instructed. Jung called this collective possession, a psychic state where a person's inner world is hijacked by the group's unconscious shadow. In this state, the person believes they are free, but in reality, they are living out values they never consciously chose. This video invites you to dive deep into this disturbing phenomenon, stupidity as a collective psychological weapon. Inspired by Bonhoeffer and Jung, we'll explore how individuals unknowingly become instruments of harm, how our consciousness gets hijacked, and why Bonhoeffer called stupidity even more dangerous than wickedness. More than mere information, this video aims to provoke a moment of recognition. Because if stupidity truly is contagious, the antidote requires a radical return to individual self-awareness. And perhaps, right now, you are more susceptible than you dare to believe. Bonhoeffer understood that stupidity wasn't a simple lapse in judgment or ignorance. It was something far darker, a spiritual and psychological collapse that turns people into unconscious tools of destructive forces. During his imprisonment by the Nazis, Bonhoeffer concluded that stupidity was more frightening than evil itself. Evil is self-aware. Stupidity is blind, yet utterly certain. It is not about lacking brainpower, but about choosing to stop thinking. This is why stupidity is not merely a personal flaw, but a collective epidemic. It thrives in environments filled with fear, chaos, and the craving for security. In these times, people retreat into group slogans, catchphrases, and comforting lies. They appear sophisticated and polite, but have quietly surrendered their moral backbone. They no longer seek truth. They crave familiarity. They don't discuss, they chant. They no longer think, they echo. Bonhoeffer believed that stupidity cannot be defeated by argument or violence. It is immune to logic. This is because the stupid person feels shielded by group support. Within that collective, ignorance transforms into a shared identity, and blind loyalty becomes a celebrated virtue. This is why Nazi propaganda didn't need to be brilliant or complicated. It just needed to offer simple, easy-to-digest slogans. It didn't require monsters at every level, only ordinary people willing to stop asking questions. Even intelligent, religious, and moral people fell under its spell. They weren't demonic. They were overtaken by stupidity. Bonhoeffer chillingly observed that when speaking to such a person, we are not engaging with a human at all, but with a walking megaphone of slogans. This depersonalization is no accident. It is by design. The individual is stripped of inner depth and turned into a loudspeaker for ideology. When stupidity reaches this stage, it isn't just a weakness, it becomes a weapon. A weapon far more lethal than any gun because it spreads silently and infects entire societies. If Bonhoeffer diagnosed the disease, Jung traced its psychological roots. How does a soul become so hollowed out? Jung believed the ultimate disaster of modernity isn't economic collapse or political turmoil, but psychic disintegration. In the rush for order and progress, humans become mechanical, functional but lifeless. We sacrifice our inner doubts, our capacity for self-reflection, and in return, we become normal on the outside, but deeply fractured within. Jung warned that this disconnection from our inner world makes us vulnerable to mass hysteria and collective possession. We think we are making our own choices, but in reality, we are echoing the system's unconscious desires. Jung wrote, "The mass always produces a leader who becomes a victim of their own inflated ego." The totalitarian leader is both a creation and prisoner of the collective mindset, a monstrous reflection of the crowd's hidden fears and fantasies. And the people follow, not out of evil intent, but because they have stopped being true individuals. Jung argued that the only escape is the difficult process of individuation, confronting the unconscious, reclaiming one's authentic self. True freedom is not doing what we please, but becoming who we really are. This journey demands courage, pain, and sacrifice, things increasingly missing in a society obsessed with comfort and distraction. When people give up their inner life, they become perfect vehicles for manipulation. On the outside, they may seem successful, intelligent, and moral. Inside, they are hollow. When masses reach this point, the result isn't simply stupidity. It is a new kind of barbarism dressed up as civilization. How does this look in practice? How do normal people participate in cruelty or irrationality without realizing it? Experiments in social psychology revealed the terrifying ease with which people abandon critical thought. Stanley Milgram's infamous study at Yale showed how ordinary people were willing to inflict severe pain on strangers simply because an authority figure calmly said, "Please continue." Over 60% delivered what they believed to be deadly shocks. These weren't monsters. They were teachers, shopkeepers, everyday folks. Their personal conscience evaporated under the illusion that someone else held the moral responsibility. Milgram's findings confirmed what Bonhoeffer had sensed. People do not act out of hatred, but out of the terrifying surrender of reason. Meanwhile, Solomon Asch's conformity experiments showed that many people will deny obvious truths, like which line matches in length, just to avoid standing alone against a group. Even when they knew they were wrong, they obeyed the majority to avoid social rejection. This is what Jung called collective possession. The individual sacrifices their judgment for group acceptance. They sense the lie but stay silent. They feel the wrongness but obey. No physical violence is necessary, just the weight of group gaze and institutional authority. This is when stupidity, as Bonhoeffer described, turns into a societal epidemic. When comfort is valued above truth, when slogans replace thinking, when fear of standing alone overpowers the urge to be free, that's when people transform into unknowing agents of harm. These dynamics are not relics of the past. They persist today in workplaces, schools, churches, and political parties. Conformity is often disguised as professionalism or loyalty. But underneath, the true battle is about whether you remain an individual with a living soul or dissolve into the crowd's echo. The unsettling question isn't just why people choose stupidity. It's why society rewards it so consistently. What Bonhoeffer saw during Nazi Germany and what Jung described as the collapse of the self are echoed today in a culture that celebrates ignorance, not as a lack of information, but as a deliberate refusal to know. Social scientists call this strategic ignorance, a choice to remain blind. Help us fight the epidemic of unthinking conformity. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell to stay awake.